10 days before this moment, the Soviet Union beat these same Americans 10-3. The score wasn't even close. The game wasn't even close. And the gap between these two teams in experience and talent and preparation in every measurable category wasn't even close. The Soviet Union had not lost an Olympic hockey game since 1968. They were not just the best hockey team in the world. They were, by most accounts, one of the best sports teams the world had ever produced. And on February 22, 1980, a group of American college kids beat them. This is how. Lake Placid, New York, February 1980. 22 American amateur players. One impossible dream. The miracle on ice isn't just a hockey story. It's a story about belief. What happens when an entire team decides to believe something that the rest of the world has already told them is impossible? But it's also a story about preparation. About a coach who was obsessed with a plan. About players who were willing to be pushed further than they'd ever been pushed before. And about a country that desperately needed something to hold on to. Today, we're telling the full story of the team nobody counted on. And the night that changed everything. America in 1980. To understand why the miracle on ice hit America the way it did, you need to understand the country it happened to. In early 1980, the United States was in crisis. Inflation was running at nearly 14%. Unemployment was rising. The Iran hostage crisis Americans held captive in the US Embassy in Tehran was dominating the news every single day, with no resolution in sight. And then, just weeks before the Olympics, President Carter announced that the United States would boycott the 1980 Summer Games in Moscow, a direct response to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. This was the backdrop. Cold War tension, economic anxiety, national humiliation. A country in genuine need of something, anything to feel good about. Into this atmosphere walked a hockey team. A young, unheralded, 7th-seeded hockey team made up of college players whose average age was 22, and a coach with a plan so audacious it bordered on delusion. Herb Brooks, the architect. Herb Brooks had a complicated relationship with the United States Olympic hockey program. In 1960, he was the last player cut from the U.S. Olympic team that went on to win the gold medal. He spent decades coaching college hockey, building the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers into a dynasty, winning 3 NCAA national championships, and carrying the memory of that 1960 cut with him every single day. When he was finally given the job to coach the 1980 Olympic team, he spent a year and a half assembling his roster. He held tryout camps in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts. His camps emphasized speed, stick handling, physical conditioning, and discipline, and included psychological testing and a detailed knowledge of international hockey. Hundreds of players tried out. 20 were selected, and the way Brooks selected them told you everything about his philosophy. He handpicked his roster, prioritizing speed and teamwork over individual talent. He famously bypassed some of the most talented American players of the era in favor of players who fit his system. Joe Mullen, one of the greatest American-born NHL players ever, was invited to camp but chose to sign with the St. Louis Blues instead. Eruzione himself later said, "Maybe I don't make the team if Joey plays." Brooks wanted a specific kind of player, not the best individual talent, the right collective talent. His training methods were legendary and legendarily brutal. Brooks emphasized team unity and conditioning, focusing on a European style of play to counter the Soviets' strengths. After a 3-3 tie against Norway in an exhibition, Brooks kept his players on the ice long after the opposing team had showered and left skating them through exhausting drill after drill in a dark, nearly empty arena. When a rink worker finally turned off the lights, Brooks had the players continue in near darkness. When one player finally asked, "When are we done?" Brooks told him, "When you skate to my satisfaction." This was the foundation. Before the Soviets, before Lake Placid, before any of it. The opponent. It's impossible to fully grasp the miracle on ice without understanding exactly who the Soviet Union was. The Soviet national team had won 4 straight Olympic golds going back to 1964, and had not lost an Olympic hockey game since 1968. Their roster featured legends like Vladislav Tretiak, Valery Kharlamov, Boris Mikhailov, Vladimir Petrov, and a rising Vyacheslav Fedosov athletes who trained and played together year-round. Though officially amateurs, the Soviets were state-sponsored professionals with an unmatched conditioning program and a 5-man puck possession style honed under coach Viktor Tikhonov. Tretiak, their goaltender, was widely regarded as the greatest goalie on earth. Their forwards were fast, skilled, and completely interchangeable, a machine, not a team. And 3 days before the Olympics began, they put on a demonstration that left absolutely no doubt about the gap. An exhibition game at Madison Square Garden. The Soviets beat the United States 10-3, not 3-1, not 5-2, 10-3. The American players were embarrassed. The press wrote them off. The odds makers buried them. And nobody in the hockey world seriously entertained the idea that this US team had any chance of winning a gold medal. Nobody except Herb Brooks, the opening round. What the world wasn't watching closely enough was what happened during the preliminary round. The United States, seeded 7th, quietly went undefeated through their opening games. They beat Sweden, Czechoslovakia, Norway, Romania, and West Germany with one tie against the Swedes when they came back from a 2-goal deficit in the final minute. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always dominant, but this team never lost. In every game, every period, every shift that Jim Craig held the line in net, the belief inside that locker room grew into something that outsiders couldn't see and couldn't measure. Brooks saw it. Before the Soviet game, he walked into the locker room and delivered what became the most famous pre-game speech in sports history. Great moments are born of great opportunity. You were born to be hockey players. This is your time. Now go out there and take it. The game. February 22, 1980. Friday afternoon. The Olympic Fieldhouse in Lake Placid. Sold out. 10,000 people. The Soviet Union broke through, first Valery Krotov deflecting a slap shot past Jim Craig in the first period. Buzz Schneider answered. Sergei Makarov put the Soviets back ahead. Then, with literally 1 second left in the first period, Dave Christian fired a desperation shot the length of the ice. Mark Johnson picked it up, sent it into the Soviet net with the clock at 0. After a brief Soviet protest, the goal stood. 2-2 after the first period. The Soviets came out of the dressing room furious and made a decision that shocked everyone. They pulled Vladislav Tretiak, the greatest goaltender in the world. To this day, no one fully agrees on why. But the man, widely regarded as the best goalie on the planet, never played another minute in that game. Vladimir Mishkin replaced him for the second period, and the Soviets dominated play, outshooting the United States 12-2. Alexander Maltsev scored to give the Soviets a 3-2 lead. If not for Jim Craig, who saved 36 of 39 shots across the entire game, the game would have been over before the third period began. But it wasn't. 3-2 heading into the final 20 minutes. With a little more than 12 minutes remaining, Mark Johnson scored on a power play to tie the contest at 3. The crowd was shaking the building. Then, a minute and a half later, Mike Eruzione, the captain from Toledo, Ohio, the man whose last name means eruption in Italian, he picked up a loose puck in the Soviet zone, 25 feet out. A wrist shot past Mishkin. For the first time all game, the United States of America had the lead, 10 minutes to go. The longest 10 minutes in American sports history. Jim Craig made save after save. The Americans cleared puck after puck. And the crowd counted down the seconds with a collective desperation that went far beyond any hockey game. And then the horn. The bench erupted. Players poured onto the ice. Craig stood in the crease, arms raised, before turning and scanning the crowd for his father. In the press box, announcer Al Michaels said 5 words that have never left the American sports conscience. Do you believe in miracles? Yes, the gold medal. And what it meant? The game against the Soviets was not, technically, the gold medal game. That detail gets forgotten. 2 days later, the United States still had to beat Finland to win the gold medal. Trailing 2-1 after 2 periods, Brooks walked into the dressing room and delivered another message between periods, urging his players to dig deep, telling them to play their game now or regret it for the rest of their lives. They did. Phil Verchota tied it. Rob McClanahan put the U.S. ahead. Mark Johnson added an insurance goal. The United States won 4-2. Gold medal for the second time in history. An American hockey team stood on the top podium at the Winter Olympics. President Carter called to congratulate the players. The team appeared on the covers of Wheaties boxes and sports magazines across the country. Ticker tape parades followed in cities coast to coast. In early 1980, the U.S. was navigating inflation, the energy crunch, and the Iran hostage crisis. The win became a national morale jolt larger than sport. To many Americans, it felt like more than a hockey game. It felt like proof that the country they had been worried about was still capable of something miraculous, the people behind the miracle. the faces of that team are etched into American memory. Jim Craig, the goaltender who played every minute of every Olympic game and made the saves that kept the dream alive. He became forever synonymous with big moment composure. Mark Johnson, the quiet, relentless forward who scored twice against the Soviets and led the team in goals throughout the tournament. Mike Eruzione, the captain, the scorer of the most famous goal in American hockey history. The man whose last name was Destiny, and Herb Brooks, the coach who was the last man cut in 1960. Who spent 20 years turning that wound into a plan. Who drove his players to the absolute limit because he knew the only way to beat the Soviets was to become something they had never seen before. Brooks would later return to coach Team USA at the 2002 Winter Games in Salt Lake City, where they won silver. He died in a car accident in 2003, just 1 year before the film Miracle was released. The film that introduced his story to a generation too young to have seen it live. He never got to see what his team had become in the American imagination, but what he built in 10 months in 1979 and 1980 has never been forgotten. 3 days before the Olympics, the Soviet Union beat these same Americans 10-3. The players on that US roster were college kids. Their captain came from the Toledo Blades of a minor league nobody had heard of. Their average age was 22. They were seeded 7th. Nobody gave them a chance. And on February 22, 1980, they did something that the sports world still struggles to fully explain, not because the result was impossible, but because of everything that had to go right simultaneously for it to happen the way it did. Drediak pulled at the end of the first period. Craig standing on his head in the second, Johnson tying it with 12 minutes left. Eruzione, 25 feet, wrist shot, top corner, and then 10 minutes of pure, terrifying belief, holding the greatest hockey team in the world at bay until the horn sounded and the crowd exploded and Al Michaels asked a question that needed no answer. They counted this team out. Every scout, every analyst, every person who watched them lose 10-3 at Madison Square Garden 10 days before it mattered. They counted them out. And then that team went to Lake Placid and did the one thing nobody believed they could do, and did it in a way that 46 years later still gives people chills.